I still remember the first time I stumbled upon an abandoned playground. It was like stepping into a forgotten world, where children's laughter and joyful screams seemed to echo through the air long after they'd left. The rusty swings creaked in the wind, and the slide seemed to stretch up to the sky like a metallic serpent. I was drawn to it like a moth to flame. My fascination with the unknown and the supernatural couldn't be quenched. As a child, I'd always been fascinated by urban legends and ghost stories. The idea of exploring places where others deemed off-limits only added to the allure. My friends thought I was crazy for wanting to venture into those abandoned playgrounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to them, something hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Now, as an adult, my desire to explore these forgotten places has only grown stronger. I've spent countless hours researching and scouring online forums for tales of abandoned playgrounds and their dark histories. It's been a few years since I first started my investigation, but the spark within me refuses to fade. And so, with a mix of trepidation and excitement, I set out on this journey into the heart of darkness, where the lines between reality and madness blur, and the secrets that lie beneath abandoned playgrounds await. The question is, will I be brave enough to face what's lurking in the shadows? I grew up playing at playgrounds, and for some reason, they always felt like more than just a place to burn off energy. They were hubs of imagination, where kids would create their own stories and games with ease. I remember spending hours at the swings, feeling the wind in my hair as I pumped my legs to reach new heights. The slide was always a thrill, a rush of adrenaline as I climbed up and whooshed down, feeling like I was flying. But what I didn't realize back then was that these playgrounds were more than just places for fun. They were also breeding grounds for fear and unease. I recall one particularly vivid memory from my childhood, standing at the edge of a playground in our neighborhood. The swings seemed to creak and groan in the wind, like an old wooden door opening and closing by itself. I was about 8 years old at the time, and my friends and I had decided to explore the off-limits area behind the playground. It was a dense thicket of bushes and trees, overgrown with vines and shrubs that seemed to writhe like living things in the sunlight. We laughed and joked as we made our way through the underbrush, but beneath the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a creeping sense of dread as we pushed deeper into the thicket. It was then that I realized that some places were better left alone, places where the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred like the edges of a photograph. Little did I know that this feeling of unease would stick with me long after childhood, haunting me as an adult in the forgotten playgrounds that I now dare to explore. I'd spent months researching and preparing for this moment, poring over old maps and scouring online forums for tales of abandoned playgrounds. Finally, the day arrived when I felt ready to face my fears and explore one of these forgotten places. I had chosen an old play center in a rundown neighborhood, its crumbling facade seeming to whisper secrets to me as I approached. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown grass and rusting equipment. I hesitated for a moment at the entrance, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I gazed up at the rickety swings and slide. Something about this place felt different, a sense of unease that lingered beneath the surface, like a faint scent of decay on the wind. I took a deep breath, pushed open the creaking gate, and stepped into the darkness within. The air inside was heavy with dust and the stench of rot. I coughed, covering my mouth with my shirt as I made my way deeper into the playground. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft crunch of gravel beneath my feet. As I explored, I began to notice signs of recent human activity: a discarded ball, a torn piece of fabric caught in a rusty chain. It was as if someone had been here recently, searching for something, or someone. My skin prickled with goose flesh as I realized that I wasn't alone in this abandoned place. But where was everyone? And what were they looking for? As I delved deeper into the playground, my heart sank with every new discovery. Behind a tangle of overgrown bushes, I stumbled upon a rusting metal box, adorned with faded warning signs and rusty hinges. The lid was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently forced it open. I hesitated for a moment, wondering what secrets lay within, before carefully prying the lid off. Inside, I found a collection of disturbing objects. A child's favorite toy, its plastic face cracked and broken. A torn photograph of a happy family, now yellowed with age and faded with tears. A handwritten note scrawled on a torn piece of paper, the words, "They're coming for us," barely legible. My mind reeled as I realized that these objects had been left behind by previous explorers, each one more unsettling than the last. Further investigation revealed a series of cryptic messages scrawled across walls and equipment, like the ramblings of a madman. "Get out while you still can." "They're watching from the shadows." "Don't look under the slide." The air seemed to grow colder with every new discovery, as if I was disturbing some long-buried secret. I knew then that I had to leave. This place was becoming too much for me. But a part of me was determined to uncover the truth behind these strange messages and objects. What was happening here? Who else had been in this playground before me? And what did they want me to know? As I ventured deeper into the playground, I began to notice strange ripples in the air. It was as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to distort and unravel. The rusting equipment seemed to be twisted and gnarled, like a reflection of some inner turmoil. The shadows danced across the walls, taking on sinister forms that seemed to move of their own accord. I could feel the weight of the playground's dark history bearing down upon me, threatening to consume me whole. The messages scrawled on the wall seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, as if they were alive and feeding off my fear. "Get out while you still can" echoed in my mind, but I knew I couldn't leave. Not now, not when I was so close to uncovering the truth. I began to notice that the ripples in reality were spreading, like a stain on an old photograph. The air itself seemed to be growing thick and heavy, as if it was being pulled into some dark vortex. I could feel my own presence rippling through time and space, leaving behind a trail of distorted reflections. The playground had always been just a place, a forgotten relic of childhood joy and laughter. But now, it had become something more, a nexus point for the very fabric of reality, and I was caught in its midst, unable to look away from the horror that was unfolding before me. As I stood there, frozen in terror, the ripples grew stronger until they became a blinding flash of light. When my vision cleared, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Myself, standing in a world that was not my own. A world where the playground had become a gateway to some dark and ancient realm. I knew then that I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The ripples in reality had become a doorway to madness, and I was ready to step through it, into the heart of terror itself. As I stood there, frozen in terror, the world around me began to distort and ripple. The shadows seemed to coalesce into dark, ghostly figures that lurched towards me. I tried to run, but my feet felt heavy as if they were rooted to the spot. The figures drew closer, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I could feel their presence washing over me, like a cold wave of dread. Suddenly, a figure materialized in front of me. It was a child, no more than 10 years old. Its eyes were black as coal and its skin was deathly pale. The child reached out a bony hand and touched my face. I felt a jolt of electricity run through my body, like a spark of life had been injected into my veins. The child's eyes seemed to bore into mine, as if it was trying to communicate some ancient, forgotten truth. I tried to speak, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The child's grip on my face tightened, and I felt myself being pulled towards the playground's dark heart. I stumbled forward as if under a spell. The child led me deeper into the playground, past the rusty equipment and twisted shadows. We walked through a landscape that seemed to shift and writhe like a living thing. The air was thick with an eerie, unnatural silence. I could feel eyes watching us from the darkness, waiting for us to pass by. The child's grip on my face remained tight, even as we walked further into the heart of madness. Suddenly, the landscape shifted, and we found ourselves standing in front of an old, decrepit slide. The child pushed me towards it, its bony fingers releasing their grip on my face. I felt myself being drawn towards the slide, as if by some unseen force. I hesitated for a moment, but the child's eyes seemed to be compelling me forward. With a sense of inevitability, I climbed up onto the slide and began to slide down its rusty surface. The world around me became a blur, like a painting smeared by a wet brush. I felt myself being pulled through time and space, towards some unknown destination. The child's laughter echoed through my mind like a cold, mirthless sound. And when I finally emerged from the slide, I knew that I had crossed into a realm where the laws of reality no longer applied. I was trapped in a world of ghostly encounters, where the playground had become a nexus point for the supernatural. As I slid down the rusty slide, I felt myself being pulled into a world of madness. The playground seemed to be shifting and twisting around me, like a living thing gone mad. The child's laughter echoed through my mind, growing louder and more maniacal with every passing moment. When I finally emerged from the slide, I stumbled forward, disoriented and confused. But as I looked around, I saw that something was wrong. My teammates seemed different, their eyes glazed over like they were under some sort of spell. They spoke in hushed tones, their words slurred and nonsensical. I tried to join in, but my own voice felt strange, like it was coming from someone else. "What's happening?" I asked, trying to keep up with the conversation. But no one seemed to understand me. The child appeared again, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. It reached out and touched my face, and suddenly I was flooded with visions of the playground's dark past. I saw children playing on the slide, laughing and shouting with joy. But as I looked closer, I saw that their smiles were twisted and sinister. They were playing a game, one that involved fear and pain. The child's touch sent shivers down my spine. I tried to pull away, but it held me fast. "This is what we're looking for," it hissed, its voice like a rusty gate. "This is the heart of madness." As the visions faded, I saw that my teammates were now staring at me with an unnerving intensity. They seemed to be waiting for something, their eyes fixed on mine like hungry predators. "What's going on?" I asked again, but this time no one answered. The child just laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the playground floor, surrounded by my teammates. They were all staring at me, their eyes glazed over like they were under some sort of spell. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sit up. But my body felt heavy, like it was weighted down with lead. My teammates just smiled, their faces twisted and sinister. "You're one of us now," they said in unison, their voices like a cold wind blowing through my mind. And then everything went black again. As I lay on the playground floor, my teammates' faces seemed to blur together in a twisted mass of confusion and menace. But then something caught my attention, a piece of paper, crumpled and discarded on the ground beside me. I picked it up, smoothing out the wrinkles as I scanned its contents. It was a memo, typed on a plain sheet of paper with no date or signature. The language was formal, almost clinical, and it spoke of a project codenamed Erebus. According to the memo, Erebus was a human presence that had been awakened by some unknown factor, and it had begun to exert its influence over the playground's inhabitants. The document outlined a series of rituals and procedures designed to harness this influence, to bend it to the will of those who controlled it. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read on, my mind reeling with the implications. This was no prank or game. We were dealing with something much darker, something that threatened the very fabric of reality. As I finished reading, I looked up to see my teammates watching me, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity. "What is it?" one of them asked, their voice low and husky. "You found the truth," another replied, a smile spreading across its face like a crack in the earth. "Now you'll understand why we're here." I felt a surge of fear as I realized that I was trapped in a living nightmare from which there was no escape. The playground had become a battleground, with my own sanity hanging precariously in the balance. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went black. When I came to, I was standing in front of an old, dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. A sign above the door read Erebus Industries, and a chill ran down my spine as I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and decay, and the only sound was the soft hum of machinery in the distance. I called out, but there was no answer. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. And then I heard it, a low, menacing chuckle that seemed to come from all around me. "Welcome," it said. "We've been waiting for you." As I stumbled through the darkness, trying to make sense of the strange laughter and flickering lights, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. It was a soft, raspy voice that seemed to be coming from all around me, speaking words that sent shivers down my spine. The playground's dark past, the tragedy that befell us all. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and I felt myself being drawn towards it like a moth to flame. Suddenly, the lights flickered back to life, casting an eerie glow over the room. I found myself standing in front of a dusty old photograph, its edges curled and worn with age. It showed a group of children, laughing and playing on the very same playground where I now stood. But there was something wrong about them, something that didn't add up. They seemed off. Their eyes seemed to be staring right through me, their smiles twisted into grotesque grins. And then I saw it, a figure standing just behind them, its presence seeming to loom over the group like a dark cloud. It was a woman, her face twisted in a scream of terror as she stared out at something beyond my comprehension. The photograph seemed to be shaking, trembling with an otherworldly energy that made my skin crawl. And then it hit me, the horror that had been lurking just beneath the surface of this place all along. The playground's dark past was more than just a legend, it was a warning, a cautionary tale about the dangers of playing with forces beyond our control. The woman in the photograph. She was the key to it all, the catalyst for the tragedy that had befallen this place so many years ago. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized the truth. We were not just innocent children playing in a park. We were participants in a twisted ritual, one that had awakened a malevolent presence that threatened to consume us all. As I stood in front of the photograph, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went silent. The lights dimmed, and the only sound was the soft creaking of old wooden floorboards beneath my feet. It was as if the very fabric of reality was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw them, the author and their group, standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. They seemed to be made of shadow and smoke, their faces twisted into grotesque grins that seemed to stretch across their skulls like rips in the skin. "Welcome," they said, their voices like a cold wind blowing through my mind. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to speak, but my voice was caught in my throat. The words that came out were not mine. They were a jumbled mess of fear and confusion, spoken by some unknown entity that seemed to be taking over my body. "What do you want from us?" I managed to stammer. "Why have we been brought here?" The group didn't answer. Instead, they began to move closer, their shadows stretching out like grasping fingers. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went black. When the lights came back on, I was standing alone in a vast, empty space. The author and their group were nowhere to be seen. But on the wall opposite me, scrawled in letters that seemed to burn with an otherworldly fire, was a message that made my blood run cold. "You will never leave this place." I stumbled through the darkness, my mind racing with fear. The playground was alive, its shadows twisting and writhing like living things. I could feel eyes on me, boring into my skin like cold, calculating knives. Every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of madness. The swings creaked and groaned, their chains rattling out a macabre rhythm that seemed to match the beat of my own heart. The slide loomed before me, its surface slick with a substance that looked like blood. I knew I had to get away from it, but my legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. And then I heard the laughter. It was a cold, mirthless sound, like the snapping of twigs on a funeral pyre. It came from all around me, echoing off the walls and ceiling. The author and their group were laughing at me, tormenting me with their presence. They seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time, their faces twisted into grotesque grins that seemed to mock my every move. I tried to run, but my feet felt like lead weights, as if they were being pulled down by an invisible force. The laughter grew louder, more intense, until it became a deafening roar that filled my ears and threatened to consume me whole. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went silent. I was left standing alone in the darkness, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves and the creaking of wooden beams. But I knew I wasn't alone. The author and their group were still there, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing on the edge of the slide. It was one of them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It beckoned to me, its bony fingers extended in a gesture that seemed to say, "Come and play." I knew I had to resist, but my legs felt like jelly, my mind clouded with fear and confusion. And then, the slide began to move, its surface gliding smoothly downwards towards me. I was trapped in a nightmare from which I might never awaken. As I descended into the abyss, the slide seemed to stretch on forever, a never-ending vortex of terror and despair. The author and their group were nowhere to be seen, but their presence still lingered, a malignant force that seemed to seep into my very soul. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of madness, with no lifeline in sight. The air was thick with the stench of rotting wood and decay, and the sky above was a deep, bloody red. It was as if reality itself was being consumed by darkness, and I was powerless to stop it. The slide finally came to an end in a vast, empty pit, surrounded by a ring of twisted, nightmarish sculptures that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. In the center of the pit stood a figure, shrouded in shadows, its face hidden behind a mask of broken glass and rusty metal. It spoke in a voice that was both familiar and yet utterly alien, saying, "Welcome home." I knew then that I had crossed into a realm where sanity was just an illusion, and madness was the only truth. The line between sanity and madness was irrevocably broken, and there was no going back. I was trapped forever in this endless descent, doomed to repeat the same cycle of terror and despair for all eternity. And so, with a sense of fatalistic resignation, I stepped forward into the abyss, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. For in this place, there was no escape from the darkness that had consumed me whole.